Dr. Maya worked at one of the most remote places on Earth, an Antarctic research station, where the wind never stopped howling and the temperature could freeze your breath in seconds. She had been there for 8 months, studying strange microorganisms that somehow survive in the frozen wasteland. Maya was the kind of person who needed proof for everything. If she couldn't measure it, test it, or explain it with science, she simply didn't believe it. Her colleagues often joked about the weird stories that came from their station. People claimed they saw lights moving under the ice at night. Others swore they heard sounds that didn't belong in the empty wilderness, like music or voices carried on the wind. The night shift workers whispered about equipment that would malfunction for no reason, showing readings that made no sense. Maya always had logical explanations for everything. The lights were probably just reflections from their own equipment. The sounds were wind patterns bouncing off ice formations. The equipment issues were simply due to the extreme cold affecting the electronics. But that winter night in July changed everything she thought she knew about the world. Maya had volunteered for the late sample collection run because she couldn't sleep anyway. The constant daylight during summer had switched to endless darkness, and her body still hadn't adjusted to the rhythm. She bundled up in her thick winter gear, grabbed her collection kit, and headed out into the Antarctic night. The temperature was negative 40 degrees, cold enough to cause frostbite in minutes if any skin was exposed. The collection site was about half a mile from the main station, near a formation of ice that had always fascinated her. The ice there was different, clearer than the rest, almost like crystal. Sometimes when she shone her flashlight through it, she could see strange patterns deep inside, like frozen lightning or the veins in a leaf. Her scientific mind told her these were just natural formations caused by pressure and temperature changes. Over thousands of years. As she knelt down to take her samples, Maya noticed something odd. The ice beneath her feet felt warm. Not melting warm, but somehow less cold than it should be. She took off one glove for just a moment to touch the surface with her bare hand. The ice felt almost alive, like it was humming with some kind of energy she couldn't identify. That's when it happened. The ice gave way beneath her without any warning. 1 second she was kneeling on solid ground. The next she was falling through what felt like empty air. Her stomach dropped as she realized she was plummeting into some kind of cavern beneath the ice. Maya tried to grab onto something, anything, but there was nothing but smooth ice walls rushing past her in the darkness. The fall seemed to last forever, but it probably only took a few seconds. She hit the bottom hard, her body slamming into what felt like stone. Pain shot through her left leg and arm. For a moment, everything went black. When she opened her eyes, Maya expected to see nothing but darkness. Instead, she found herself surrounded by the most beautiful and terrifying sight she had ever witnessed. The cavern around her was massive, with walls that stretched up into shadows her flashlight couldn't reach. But she didn't need her flashlight to see. The walls themselves were glowing with a soft blue-green light that pulsed slowly, like a giant heartbeat. The light seemed to move through the stone like water flowing through glass, creating patterns that shifted and changed as she watched. Maya tried to stand up but immediately fell back down as pain shot through her leg. She looked down and saw a deep gash running from her knee to her ankle. Her thick winter pants were torn, and blood was seeping through the fabric. In the strange light of the cavern, the blood looked almost black. She knew she was in serious trouble, even if her radio worked down here, which it probably didn't. She was too far from the station for anyone to find her quickly. As she fumbled for her first aid kit, something impossible happened. The bleeding stopped, not gradually, like it should have, but all at once, as if someone had turned off a faucet. Maya stared at her leg in confusion. She carefully pulled back the torn fabric to get a better look at the wound, expecting to see the gash still bleeding. Instead, she watched in amazement as the edges of the cut began to pull together on their own. She blinked hard, thinking the strange light was playing tricks on her eyes. But when she looked again, the wound was definitely healing, not just clotting or scabbing over, but actually closing up like a zipper being pulled shut. Within minutes, where there had been a deep cut that should have needed stitches, There was only a thin red line that looked like an old scar. Maya's scientific mind raced to find an explanation. Maybe the extreme cold had numbed her so much that she was imagining the pain. Maybe the wound wasn't as bad as it looked. Maybe the weird lighting was making everything look different than it really was. But deep down, she knew what she was seeing was real. Her body was healing itself in a way that wasn't medically possible. She sat there for several minutes, just staring at her leg and trying to process what had happened. The cavern around her continued to pulse with that strange light, and now she noticed that the air itself felt different. It was warmer than it should be this far underground in Antarctica, and it seemed to carry a slight electrical charge that made the hair on her arms stand up. Maya's radio crackled with static, but no voices came through. She was completely cut off from the outside world, sitting in an impossible place that shouldn't exist, with a body that was doing things bodies weren't supposed to do. For the first time in her life, her scientific training couldn't provide answers for what she was experiencing. That's when she heard the footsteps. They echoed through the cavern from somewhere in the darkness beyond her flashlight beam. But these weren't normal footsteps. They had a rhythm that was almost musical, and they seemed to come from multiple directions at once. Maya's heart began to race as she realized she wasn't alone in this strange underground world. The footsteps were getting closer, and with them came a sound she couldn't identify, like whispers in a language she had never heard before. Maya tried to stand up, testing her mysteriously healed leg. It held her weight perfectly, as if she had never been injured at all. She grabbed her flashlight and pointed it toward the approaching sounds. But all she could see were more glowing walls and shadows that seemed to move on their own. Whatever was coming toward her in the darkness, Maya knew her life was about to change forever. The woman who had fallen through the ice was a scientist who believed only in facts and evidence. But the person who was about to meet these mysterious beings was someone who had already experienced the impossible and lived to tell about it. Maya held her breath as the footsteps grew louder. Her heart was beating so fast she could hear it echoing in her ears. She pointed her flashlight toward the sounds, but the beam seemed weak compared to the strange glow coming from the cavern walls. The whispers she had heard before were getting clearer now, though she still couldn't understand the words. They sounded like a conversation happening in a language that had never existed on Earth. Then she saw them. The first figure stepped into the light, and Maya's mind struggled to process what she was looking at. It was definitely alive, definitely intelligent, but unlike anything she had ever seen or imagined. The being was tall, probably 7 feet, with a body that seemed to shift between solid and translucent. Its skin looked like it was made of the same material as the glowing cavern walls, with light flowing beneath the surface in slow, mesmerizing patterns. The creature's face was the most human-like part of it, but even that was strange. Its eyes were large and multifaceted, like a dragonfly's, but they reflected intelligence and curiosity rather than the blank stare of an insect. When it moved, it did so with a grace that reminded Maya of dancers she had seen, every movement deliberate and flowing. More figures emerged from the shadows behind the first one. Maya counted at least 6 of them, all similar in appearance, but with subtle differences in height and the patterns of light that moved through their skin. They formed a semicircle around her, but they kept their distance, as if they were as curious and cautious about her as she was about them. One of them stepped forward from the group. This one was clearly different from the others. It carried itself with an authority that was unmistakable, and the light patterns in its skin were more complex, more vibrant. Maya somehow knew without being told that this was their leader. The being's large eyes fixed on Maya's leg, right where the impossible healing had taken place. What happened next was unlike anything Maya had ever experienced in her life. For suddenly, there were thoughts in her head that weren't her own. Not words exactly, but ideas and feelings and images that appeared in her mind as clearly as if she had thought them herself. It was like having someone else's memories suddenly become part of her own consciousness. The first message was simple. Curiosity. The being was asking, without words, who she was and how she had come to be in their home. Maya tried to think back, to somehow respond, and amazingly, it worked. She focused on images of the research station above, her work, her fall through the ice. The beings seemed to understand. More complex ideas began to flow between them. Maya learned that the being's name was something that couldn't be translated into any human language. But the closest she could come to it was Lyra. The other beings around her were Lyra's people, and they had lived in these caverns for longer than human civilization had existed on the surface. Through their mental connection, Lyra shared incredible knowledge with Maya. These beings weren't visitors from another planet, they were Earth's original inhabitants, the first intelligent species to evolve on this world. Millions of years ago, when the planet's surface was very different, they had lived above ground. But a great catastrophe had forced them underground, and they had been hiding beneath the ice ever since. Maya's scientific mind was reeling. Everything she thought she knew about evolution, about the history of life on Earth, was being turned upside down. But the evidence was right in front of her. These beings had technology that seemed to work on principles she couldn't understand. The cavern itself was clearly artificial, though it looked natural. The glowing walls weren't just pretty, they were some kind of advanced lighting, and possibly communication system. But what fascinated Lyra most wasn't Maya's presence in their world. It was her healing ability. Through their mental link, Lyra shared her amazement at what she had witnessed. The rapid healing wasn't normal for humans. She explained, in fact, it shouldn't have been possible at all. Maya's body had done something that even Lyra's advanced people would have found impressive. The being's large eyes kept returning to Maya's leg, studying it with an intensity that made Maya uncomfortable. Lyra began to probe deeper into Maya's mind, not forcefully, but with a gentle curiosity that Maya found she couldn't resist. The being was looking for something, searching through Maya's memories and genetic makeup in ways that Maya didn't fully understand. It was like having someone read through her entire life story, but doing it by directly accessing her thoughts rather than asking questions. What Lyra found there shocked both of them. Hidden deep in Maya's genetic code were markers that shouldn't have existed. Sequences of DNA that weren't entirely human, but weren't entirely alien either. They were a combination of both, so subtle that no human technology would have been able to detect them. But in the strange energy field of the cavern, these dormant genes had suddenly activated, giving Maya abilities that her species wasn't supposed to possess. The implications hit Maya like a physical blow. She wasn't fully human. Somewhere in her family tree, generations ago, there had been contact between her ancestors and Lyra's people. The healing ability wasn't a miracle or a malfunction. It was her alien heritage finally awakening after lying dormant for centuries. Lyra's thoughts conveyed a mixture of wonder and sadness. Her people had assumed that any genetic traces they might have left in the surface world had been lost forever, diluted beyond recognition by generations of purely human breeding. Maya's existence proved that wasn't true. She was living evidence that the boundaries between species were more flexible than anyone had imagined. The other beings in the cavern began to communicate among themselves, their thoughts creating a web of mental conversation that Maya could sense, but not fully understand. She caught fragments of their discussion, debates about whether to reveal themselves to the surface world, concerns about Maya's safety, questions about how many other hybrids might exist without knowing their true nature. Through it all, Lyra kept her focus on Maya, studying her with the intensity of a scientist who had just discovered a new species. But there was something else in the being's mental emanations, something that felt almost parental. Maya realized with a shock that Lyra wasn't just interested in her as a scientific curiosity. There was a personal connection here, something deeper than mere fascination with her genetic anomaly. As the hours passed in the glowing cavern, Maya found herself caught between two worlds. Above her, somewhere beyond the ice, was the life she had known, her research, her colleagues, her entire understanding of what it meant to be human. Below, surrounding her in this impossible place, was a civilization that challenged everything she thought she knew about Earth's history and her own identity. The most terrifying part wasn't that her world had suddenly become much larger and more complex. It was the growing realization that she would never be able to go back to the simple life she had known before. The knowledge of what she had discovered, of what she was, would change everything forever. Maya spent the next several hours learning truths that shattered everything she thought she knew about herself and the world. Lyra's mental connection grew stronger, allowing them to share not just thoughts, but actual memories and experiences. It was like watching movies inside her own mind, except these movies were real events from Lyra's incredibly long life. Through these shared memories, Maya saw Earth as it had been millions of years ago. The planet looked completely different then, where frozen Antarctica now existed. There had once been lush forests and warm oceans. Lyra's people had built magnificent cities that seemed to grow from the landscape itself, structures that were part architecture and part living organism. Their technology worked in harmony with nature rather than fighting against it. But then came the catastrophe. Maya experienced it through Lyra's ancestral memories, feeling the terror and confusion. As massive climate changes began reshaping the planet, volcanic eruptions darkened the skies for years. Ocean levels rose and fell dramatically. The very continents shifted and moved. Lyra's people watched helplessly as their beautiful world transformed into something harsh and unfamiliar. Most of their species perished during this time. The survivors were forced to retreat underground, using their advanced technology to create the hidden cities beneath the ice. They had been waiting down there ever since, hoping that someday the surface world would become hospitable again. But millions of years had passed, and the Earth above had become the domain of a completely different kind of intelligent life. Humans. Maya learned that her people's arrival had been both a blessing and a curse for Lyra's civilization. Humans were similar enough to be fascinating, but different enough to be dangerous. Some of Lyra's people had wanted to make contact, to share their knowledge and perhaps learn from the newcomers. Others believed that revealing themselves would only lead to conflict and destruction. A few brave individuals from Lyra's people had occasionally ventured to the surface. Over the centuries, they were careful to stay hidden, but sometimes they encountered humans who lived in remote areas. These meetings were rare and usually brief, but occasionally something more significant happened. Sometimes, despite all the biological differences between the species, a deeper connection formed. Maya felt her face grow hot as she realized what Lyra was telling her. Her ancestors hadn't just met these beings. They had formed relationships with them. The alien DNA in her bloodstream wasn't the result of some cosmic accident or scientific experiment. It was inherited from a great-great-grandmother who had fallen in love with someone from Lyra's world. The mental images Lyra shared showed Maya exactly how it had happened. Centuries ago, a young woman named Elena lived alone in a cabin in what would later become part of Russia. She had been considered strange by her neighbors because she preferred the company of books to people and had an unusual gift for healing sick animals. One winter night, she discovered an injured being that had been caught in a blizzard while exploring the surface world. Elena nursed the being back to health, and during those long winter months, they learned to communicate despite their differences. Their relationship developed slowly, built on mutual curiosity and respect. When spring came, the being had to return to his underground home, but Elena was already carrying his child. Maya watched these memories with fascination and growing understanding. Elena's daughter had been born looking completely human, but she carried genetic gifts that manifested in small ways throughout her life. She lived longer than most people of her time. She never got seriously ill. Small injuries healed faster than they should have. These traits were passed down through the generations, growing weaker with each passing year, but never completely disappearing. Through Lyra's mental connection, Maya traced her family line backward through time. Her great-grandmother had been known in her village as someone who could heal others with just a touch. Her grandmother had lived to be over 100 while remaining physically active and sharp-minded. Her mother had always recovered remarkably quickly from illnesses and injuries, though she had never thought much about it. Maya herself had always been different in ways she had never fully recognized. She remembered being a child and having cuts and scrapes disappear overnight. Her teachers had always commented on how she seemed to understand complex concepts intuitively, without needing to study as hard as other students during her years. In Antarctica, she had adapted to the harsh conditions far more easily than her colleagues, as if the cold environment actually energized her rather than draining her. Now she understood why. The dormant alien genes in her DNA had been quietly influencing her entire life, preparing her for this moment when they would finally fully activate. The energy field in Lyra's cavern had been the catalyst, awakening abilities that had been sleeping in her genetic code for generations. But the most shocking revelation was still to come. Through their deepening mental connection, Maya learned that her alien ancestor hadn't been just any member of Lyra's people. He had been Lyra's own offspring, a prince in their underground civilization who had inherited his mother's gift for leadership and healing. This meant that Maya wasn't just a random hybrid. She was part of Lyra's direct family line, a descendant of the alien queen herself. The genetic markers in her DNA weren't just proof of her mixed heritage, they were indicators of royal bloodline, traits that had been passed down through Lyra's family for millions of years. Lyra's reaction to this discovery was overwhelming. Through their mental link, Maya felt the being's joy, relief, and profound sadness all at once. For centuries, Lyra had mourned the loss of her surface-dwelling descendants, believing that her family line had been severed forever. Maya's existence proved that her bloodline had survived and even thrived in the world above. The other beings in the cavern seemed to sense the significance of what had been revealed. Their whispered mental conversations grew more intense, and Maya caught fragments of their thoughts. They were discussing her not as a curiosity or even as a welcome visitor, but as someone who might be the key to bridging the gap between their two worlds. Maya's head was spinning with all the information she had absorbed. In the space of a few hours, she had learned that she wasn't fully human, that her family history stretched back through centuries of hidden relationships between species, and that she was somehow related to the ruler of an ancient underground civilization. The scientist in her was fascinated by these discoveries, but the human part of her felt lost and overwhelmed. Everything that had defined her identity was now in question. Was she Maya the human scientist, or was she something else entirely? Did her achievements in life belong to her human determination and intelligence, or were they the result of alien genetics giving her unfair advantages? Most importantly, what was she supposed to do with this knowledge now that she possessed it? Lyra seemed to understand her confusion. Through their mental connection, the alien queen shared feelings of compassion and understanding. She had watched many of her people struggle with questions of identity and purpose over the millions of years of their underground exile. The key, she suggested, wasn't to choose between being human or alien, but to embrace being both. As Maya sat in the glowing cavern, surrounded by beings who were both completely foreign and somehow family, she realized that her life had reached a turning point from which there would be no return. Maya felt like she was drowning in information and emotions. Learning about her alien heritage had been overwhelming enough, but discovering she was directly related to Lyra made everything infinitely more complicated. As she sat in the glowing cavern, trying to process everything she had learned, Lyra approached her with what Maya could only describe as motherly concern. Through their mental connection, Lyra began to show Maya what her life could become if she chose to embrace her true nature. The visions that filled Maya's mind were unlike anything she had ever imagined. She saw herself learning to use abilities that made her current healing power SEM simple by comparison in Lyra's projected future. Maya could communicate telepathically across vast distances, understand the deepest secrets of how life worked on a cellular level, and even influence the growth and healing of other living beings. But the most incredible vision was of Maya serving as a bridge between the two worlds. Lyra showed her images of the surface and underground civilizations working together, sharing knowledge and resources that could benefit both species. Maya saw herself translating not just languages, but entire ways of thinking, helping humans and Lyra's people understand each other despite their vast differences. The underground world that Lyra revealed to Maya was breathtaking. Beyond the cavern where they sat, there were entire cities carved into the ice and rock, populated by thousands of beings like Lyra. Their technology was so advanced that it seemed like magic to Maya. As human understanding, they had learned to work with natural forces rather than against them, creating systems that could provide energy, food, and shelter without damaging the environment around them. Maya saw laboratories where Lyra's people studied the mysteries of consciousness itself, trying to understand how thoughts and emotions worked at the deepest levels. She witnessed art forms that combine music, light, and telepathic communication to create experiences that could never be reproduced on the surface. Most amazingly, she learned that Lyra's people had discovered ways to extend their lives far beyond what any human could imagine. Some individuals living for hundreds of thousands of years while remaining physically and mentally young. All of this could be hers, Lyra explained, if she chose to undergo the full genetic activation process. Her dormant alien DNA could be completely awakened, giving her access to abilities and knowledge that had been accumulated over millions of years. She would become a true hybrid, combining the best aspects of both species. But as Lyra continued to share these visions, Maya began to understand the cost of such a transformation. The genetic activation wasn't reversible. Once her alien DNA was fully awakened, she would no longer be able to live as a normal human. Her body would require the specific energy conditions found in the underground cities. Her mind would be connected to the collective consciousness of Lyra's people, making it difficult to relate to humans who couldn't share thoughts telepathically. Most troubling of all, the activation process would gradually make her incompatible with normal human society. Her appearance would slowly change, becoming more like Lyra's people. Her thought patterns would become increasingly alien. Within a few years, she would be unable to pass as human even if she wanted to. Maya realized she was being offered a choice between two completely different futures. She could return to the surface, suppress her awakening abilities, and continue her life as a human scientist. Her colleagues would assume she had been hallucinating during her time trapped in the cavern, and eventually she might even convince herself that the whole experience had been a dream brought on by injury and cold. She could publish papers about the strange ice formation she had discovered, never mentioning the civilization that lived beneath them. Or she could stay and become something entirely new, gaining incredible abilities but losing her human identity forever. She would become an ambassador between worlds, but she would no longer truly belong to either one. Lyra gave Maya time to consider her options, but she also made it clear that the choice couldn't be delayed indefinitely. The energy field in the cavern was already beginning to activate more of Maya's dormant genes. If she stayed much longer without making a decision, the choice would be made for her by her own changing biology. As Maya wrestled with this impossible decision, she began to think about what she would be giving up and what she would be gaining. Her life on the surface had always felt somewhat empty, despite her professional success. She had devoted herself to science because she was searching for something she couldn't quite define. Now she understood that what she had been looking for was a sense of belonging, a feeling that she was part of something larger than herself. But choosing Lyra's world would mean abandoning everyone and everything she had ever known. Her colleagues at the research station would assume she had died in the ice. Her few friends and distant family members would never know what had really happened to her. She would have to watch from a distance as humanity continued to develop and change, knowing that she could help them but being unable to reveal herself. Maya thought about her years of education, her research, her dreams of making important scientific discoveries that would benefit humanity. All of that seemed small and insignificant compared to what Lyra was offering her. But it was still her life, the only one she had ever known. The decision became even more complicated when Lyra revealed another crucial piece of information. The Earth's climate was changing in ways that threatened both the surface and underground civilizations. The ice sheets that protected Lyra's cities were beginning to melt and shift. Meanwhile, human activities were affecting global temperatures and weather patterns in ways that could make the planet uninhabitable for both species. Within a few centuries, Maya's unique heritage positioned her to help solve these problems, but only if she was willing to fully embrace her dual nature. As a complete hybrid, she could understand both human technology and the advanced systems used by Lyra's people. She could help develop solutions that neither species could create alone. Lyra showed Maya visions of what could happen if the two civilizations continued to remain separate. The surface world might become uninhabitable due to climate change, while the underground cities could be destroyed by melting ice and shifting geological conditions. Both species could face extinction simply because they didn't know about each other's existence and couldn't combine their knowledge to solve their common problems. But if Maya chose to become a bridge between the worlds, she could help prevent this catastrophe. She could gradually introduce advanced technologies to human civilization, while helping Lyra's people understand and adapt to the changing surface conditions. The survival of both species might depend on her willingness to sacrifice her comfortable human existence. As Maya contemplated this enormous responsibility, she realized that her decision would affect far more than just her own future. The fate of two entire civilizations might rest on the choice she made in the next few hours. The weight of that responsibility was almost crushing, but it also gave her a sense of purpose she had never experienced before. Lyra sensed Maya's internal struggle and offered one final piece of guidance. Through their mental connection, the alien queen shared her own experiences of making difficult choices for the good of her people. She had sacrificed personal happiness many times over the millions of years of her life, but each sacrifice had led to something greater and more meaningful than what she had given up. The choice was Maya's to make, but time was running out. Maya closed her eyes and tried to quiet the chaos in her mind. The weight of choosing between two entire ways of existence felt impossible to bear. But as she sat in the glowing cavern, something unexpected happened. Instead of her own thoughts, she began experiencing what felt like memories that weren't hers, flashes of lives lived by people she had never met but somehow knew intimately. She saw her great-great-grandmother Elena, alone in her cabin, making the choice to help an injured being from another world. Maya felt Elena's fear, her curiosity, and ultimately her decision to follow her heart rather than her fear. She experienced the courage it took for Elena to love someone so different from herself, knowing that their relationship could never be understood by the world around them. Maya witnessed the struggles of her other ancestors, women who had carried alien gifts without understanding what they meant. She felt their confusion when they healed faster than others, their isolation when their intuitive knowledge set them apart from their communities, and their quiet strength as they passed these mysterious gifts to their children. Finally, Maya saw herself as a child, always feeling different but never understanding why. She remembered the moment she first decided to become a scientist, driven by a need to understand the world that seemed both familiar and foreign to her. Every choice she had made, every path she had taken, had led her to this cavern and this moment. The vision ended with a profound realization. Her existence wasn't an accident or a cosmic coincidence. She was the result of generations of choices, made by people who believed that love and understanding could bridge any gap. No matter how vast, her very DNA was proof that the seemingly incompatible species could not only coexist, but create something beautiful together. With this understanding came clarity. Maya opened her eyes and looked at Lyra. Her decision finally made. She would accept the genetic activation, but not in the way Lyra expected. Instead of choosing between her human and alien nature, Maya proposed something that had never been attempted before. She would become a true bridge between worlds, spending time in both civilizations and helping them learn from each other gradually. Lyra was initially uncertain about this plan. The partial activation Maya was suggesting had never been tried before and could be dangerous. But as Maya explained her vision through their mental connection, the alien queen began to understand the wisdom of this approach. A sudden revelation of Lyra's civilization could cause panic and fear among humans, but a gradual introduction, facilitated by someone who truly belonged to both worlds, could lead to genuine understanding and cooperation. The activation process that followed was unlike anything Maya could have imagined. She felt her DNA restructuring itself at the cellular level, awakening abilities that had slept in her genetic code for generations. The pain was incredible, as if every cell in her body was being taken apart and rebuilt from scratch. But alongside the pain came an expansion of consciousness that was breathtaking. Maya's senses became incredibly sharp. She could hear the heartbeats of Lyra's people across the cavern. She could see patterns of energy flowing through the glowing walls that revealed how the entire underground city was powered and maintained. Most amazingly, she could feel the thoughts and emotions of every living being around her, from the complex consciousness of Lyra's people to the simple awareness of microorganisms in the ice. But Maya had insisted on maintaining enough of her human biology to survive on the surface. This meant the transformation was incomplete, leaving her caught between two states of being. She would never be as powerful as a full member of Lyra's species, but she would also never be as limited as a normal human. She was something entirely new, a conscious bridge between two evolutionary paths. When the process was complete, Maya found that she could control her abilities to some degree. Around humans, she could suppress most of her alien traits and appear normal, though she would always heal faster and think more clearly than others. In the underground cities, she could access more of her enhanced abilities, communicating telepathically and understanding advanced technologies that would be impossible for a purely human mind to grasp. Returning to the surface proved to be the most challenging part of Maya's new existence. Her colleagues at the research station found her after 3 days, assuming she had been trapped in an ice cave after her fall. Maya's story of being unconscious for most of that time was accepted without question, especially since she showed no signs of serious injury despite her ordeal. But everything had changed for Maya. She saw her human colleagues differently now, understanding their thoughts and motivations in ways that sometimes made her uncomfortable. She had to constantly monitor herself to avoid revealing knowledge she shouldn't possess, or abilities that would raise questions she couldn't answer. Over the following months, Maya began her work as a secret ambassador between worlds. She would make regular trips back to the cavern, always finding logical scientific reasons for her extended research expeditions. During these visits, she learned more about Lyra's civilization and their advanced technologies. She also helped Lyra's people understand human society, sharing insights about surface culture and politics that could be crucial. When the time came for open contact, Maya began introducing revolutionary ideas into her scientific work, discoveries that seemed to come from nowhere, but were actually based on knowledge shared by Lyra's people. She published papers on healing techniques that worked far better than existing medical treatments. She developed new approaches to environmental science that could help address climate change. Her colleagues were amazed by her sudden burst of innovative thinking, attributing it to her near-death experience changing her perspective on life. Most importantly, Maya began quietly identifying other people who might carry dormant alien genes. She found them in unexpected places: a nurse whose patients healed unusually quickly, an engineer who could intuitively understand complex systems, a teacher whose students seemed to absorb knowledge faster when she was around. These people didn't know what they were, but Maya could sense the sleeping alien DNA in their genetic code. She began reaching out to these individuals carefully, testing their reactions to unusual ideas and watching for signs that their dormant abilities might be awakening. Some of them showed promise as potential allies who could help prepare humanity for eventual contact with Lyra's civilization. Years passed, and Maya continued her double life. She aged more slowly than she should have, a fact she carefully concealed from her colleagues. Her research contributions became legendary in the scientific community, though she never revealed the true source of her insights. She watched as human technology gradually advanced in directions that would make contact with Lyra's people less shocking when it finally occurred. Maya knew that someday, the two civilizations would have to openly acknowledge each other's existence. Climate change and other global challenges were accelerating, and both species would need to work together to survive. When that day came, she would be ready to help guide both sides through the transition that would forever change what it meant to be human. Until then, she remained a secret guardian of two worlds, carrying the hopes and fears of both species as she worked to build a future where humans and Lyra's people could stand together under the same sky. Her existence proved that love could transcend any boundary, and that understanding was possible even between beings as different as the children of Earth and the children of the stars.